Okay, without further ado and without further delays, God willing, we're picking up today from chapter 4. I'm going to do a recap. We're in this book of Shmuel Beis, the second book of Shmuel, chapter 4. We'll do a recap. When we last left off, there's a very significant event that occurred, which was the assassination of Abner. You'll recall that the kingdom was split into two, or no, it wasn't split, but there were two kings. One was originally Shaul, and the other was David. After Shaul passed, Avner was the one who rallied support for Shaul's descendant, his son Ishbosheth. Avner was the army general, and Ishbosheth, his influence spread over Israel, and David was only in charge of the tribe of Yehuda. Then, after a scuffle, which we spoke about, Avner ended up getting assassinated by Yoav, who was the army general of David. Right? So David's general assassinates Abner. Even though Abner had shown support for David, he had turned and started supporting David, but he was assassinated by Yoav, who didn't want to hear from it and didn't trust Abner. So what this does is, where this leaves us and left us, is that David's kingship right at the onset is rocked, which is very interesting to consider. As David rises to power, we see all kinds of crazy things happening, trying to disturb his rulership. So this assassination, on the one hand, you can argue, is a good thing. The one who appointed his opposition is now dead. But David didn't view it like that at all. First of all, Avner had changed to show support to David and even started rallying others to follow David. And this is just, it looks bad. It's a bad stain on you. You're killing one of your supporters. But more than that, it makes David look like some sort of political hound, that he's just trying to crush anybody who stood up against him ever. And therefore, the response of David was to show publicly how much he hated this assassination and didn't want anything to do with it. He wanted very powerfully to disassociate himself with this action. So what he does is he arranges a very public funeral for Abner, and he insists that everybody cry and eulogize him. And David himself gives a eulogy, a very stirring one, talking about how Abner was taken in an unreasonable way. And he also curses the person who did it. He utters a curse on Yoav. And not only does he curse Yoav with 5 different curses, but at his death, he instructs his son Shlomo to kill Yoav, to put Yoav to death for this deed that he did of assassinating Abner. So David is trying to show very strongly that he did not want anything to do with this. He did not support the assassination of Abner. I'll just mention, just for the notes and for your information, that those curses that David uttered and put on Yoav actually ended up flipping and applying to his own children, his own descendants. We won't go through it in detail now, but the Talmud says, since he was anyways going to execute Yoav, or he would have Shlomo execute Yoav, it is not appropriate that you should also curse him. It's like a double jeopardy. You're going to get cursed, but then also killed. That's not fair. So those curses were deflected, and they actually went on David's descendants. And so see the Radak for detail there. Okay, this brings us to chapter 4, which is going to involve another very significant assassination, and David once again is going to want to distance himself from that action. Perhaps what I'll do is I'll quickly tell you the events of chapter 4, and then we'll go through it line by line. It's very straightforward. The last remaining son of Shaul was Ishbosheth, who was the king temporarily. He is now going to be assassinated by 2 men of his own tribe. 2 men of his own tribe are going to kill him, and they're going to bring his head to David as like a show of their allegiance. Look, we killed the other guy, and now you're the king. We're doing you a big favor. David gets absolutely uh, livid about this, and he commands that they be executed. And not only that, but they're chopped up and they're hanged for everybody to see how much David detests this. How much David detests this. And at the end of the chapter, what ends up is you have David who didn't do this deed, didn't want anything to do with it, but at the end of the day, there's no opposition now whatsoever, and he's free to take the kingdom. And in chapter 5, we probably won't get to tonight, his kingdom is going to be solidified. He's going to gather support from everyone. He's going to start making his capital in Jerusalem. Okay, so that's what's coming. So let's now go through it more with more focus on the verses. Okay, so chapter 4, verse number 1. Vaishma ben Shaul ki meis Avner bechevron. The son of Shaul heard that Avner died in Hebron. Who is the son of Shaul? That's Ishbosheth. That was the one who was king. He's not referred to by name here because after the death of Abner, who was his PR guy, he had nothing going for him other than the fact that he was from the line of Shaul, that he was the son of Shaul. He had nothing going for him, no reason that he should really be the king. Everything was stripped from him. So he hears that Abner is dead. Vayirpu yadav, his hands are weakened. V'chol Yisrael nivhalu, and the rest of the Jewish people were nivhal, shocked, confused, afraid. It's a word that can mean a few things. And now the shock of the Jewish people is because they're not sure, what do we do with this David now? He seems to be righteous, and maybe he is righteous, but the people that surround him, David's army general, he's a hothead. He just killed Abner, who started supporting David. So people are nervous. Can we really trust David? And can we trust the people that he surrounds himself with? You'll recall that David's followers from the outset were a bunch of hoodlums, 400 ruffians from Hebron. And people are getting nervous about that. Maybe he is independently fit to be king, but his advisors, his generals, the people that surround him, they're not so wholesome. And that's an issue. Okay. Ushnei anashim sereg dudim hayu ben Shaul, shema echad ba'anav, v'shema sheni rachav. There were these two individuals who were heads of legions for Shaul, and they supported Ishbosheth originally. One was Ba'anan, one was Rechav. There's these two individuals. The Bnei Binyamin, from the sons of Benjamin, because they came from a place from Be'erot, which is also considered from Benjamin. In other words, they were on a bordering town of Benjamin, and sometimes people wondered if it was part of Benjamin or not. And the Navi is clarifying that they were indeed from the Binyamin and from the area of Binyamin. So that's significant because they are the people of Shaul, the people of Ishbosheth. The Navi doesn't tell us why, but it says that these individuals fled. And they lived in a different place called Gitam. The Mefarshim say that these individuals fled because they had done something wrong. Apparently they had already committed a murder and they were on the run, which shows you they were not dealing with the nicest people. Now, the verses kind of digress, and they tell us about Jonathan's son. Jonathan is the son of Shaul. He's already passed away. And his son is a person named Mephibosheth, who is crippled. How did he become crippled? When he was 5 years old, his father, Jonathan, and his grandfather, Shaul, were killed in battle, as we know. And when the news arrived, the nursemaid was afraid. She picked up Mephibosheth, this child, the grandson of Shaul, and she started running, and she dropped him. And from this, he became crippled. Ushmo Mephibosheth. His name was Mephibosheth. Why is this here? It's not going to continue talking about him. The reason it's here is showing us that there are no more descendants of Saul who are fit to be king. A cripple, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to be the king of Israel, and therefore there's nobody left from the line of Shaul. Now that Ishbosheth has been assassinated, there's no one left from the line of Shaul who can reign. There's only this person who's crippled. We're going to hear about him again later. This is actually also a foreshadow. And the Gemara goes into even greater length about who Mephibosheth was, assuming it's the same Mephibosheth that the Gemara is referring to. He was a tremendous scholar, tremendous Talmid Chacham, and David would ask him questions. And anything that David would rule, any issue he would rule on, he would ask Mephibosheth if he got it correctly. He humbled himself in front of this scholar. But in any event, he was a cripple, not fit to be king. Okay, so now these two fellows, and they came in the middle of the day, El Beit Ish Boshet, to the house of Ish Boshet. And he was taking a nap. He was having a nap. And it says, they came into the house, selling wheat. And they struck him in the fifth rib, which is instant death, as we already know. This is the third time this fifth rib comes up. And Rechav fled. So it sounds like Ishbosheth was killed in his bed while he was sleeping, and then these two perpetrators fled. Then it says, Vayavo abide, and they came back in the house, and he's lying in his bed. Vayaku vaymitu, they killed him, and they removed his head, and they took his head, and they started going to David. They spent the whole night traveling to David and Hebron. The Al-Sheikh here points out that the psukim seem to be repetitive and a little bit unclear, because it first tells you about the two individuals, and then it says without a name that they entered the house. They entered the house selling wheat. So the Al-Sheikh suggests that what happened was they first came to the king, and Ishbosheth, they first came to him as their regular selves. We are the heads of the legions, of the armies, and we're coming to see you. They see that he's napping. They leave the house. They come back in disguise, as if they're selling wheat, and they assassinate him in his sleep. Then they leave. And then, I want to make sure I'm getting it right. I'm going to open the source that I'm quoting. Good. And then, as everyone in the house, maybe they heard about his death, maybe they realized what happened, so they went to go search for these wheat sellers. They removed their costumes, went back in the house while the place was empty, beheaded Ishbosheth, and took his head to David. Okay, so the Al-Sheikh, to put all the psukim together, says that first they came in as themselves, then they came in disguise, they assassinated Ishbosheth, and after they left, everyone went searching for these assassins. They came back in as their regular selves, took his head, and went to David. Now in verse number 8, they bring the head of Ishbosheth to David, and they say to the king, here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Shaul, your enemy, who sought your soul, meaning his father tried to kill you. And now Hashem has given our master, the king, revenge on this day from Shaul and from his descendants. So they were very proud of themselves. They had brought him a gift. They brought him a gift, right? This head of his enemy. And Mazel Tov, we hope you like the gift, because now Hashem is taking care of all your enemies. I was just visiting my sister who has a cat. And while I was there, the cat had delivered a present. He brought a mole rat, a little animal, a little rodent. And after injuring it, the cat placed it in the sink of the house as a gift for her owners, for her masters. Right? Won't they love it? It's very similar to this. They took the head of Ishbosheth. They thought this would be a gift to David. Oh, here it is, this delightful thing that you're going to love. And the reaction was anything but what they expected. Vayan David, verse number 9. Vayan David et Rechav et banav. He answers them, and he says to them, Chai Hashem, asher padat nafshi mikol tzara. He swears in the name of God. Yamagid li lemor, hine met Shaul. What are you thinking? Do you remember the guy who told me, the Amalekite who told me that Shaul had died and that he had killed him? What did I do to him? I had him executed. You think by bringing me Shaul's son's head, you're going to make me happy? And now you wicked people are killing a man in his sleep, in his home. Certainly you're going to be executed. If you think this makes me happy, you're mistaken. You must have not heard about the Amalekite. What are you, out of your minds? I killed that guy for telling me that he killed Shaul. I'm going to kill you now for telling me that you killed his righteous son. And I shall eradicate you from the earth. You see here once again, David didn't have any grudges against against Ishbosheth, not against Shaul, not against Shaul's son, who was also king at the same time as David. He had no negative feelings towards them. The purity of David here is being expressed once again. But once again, we have to realize that this is a problem. This is creating a problem for David. This is very bad press. David is slicing heads off to get to the top and to take the lead. It sounds like a selfish politician rather than a righteous person. So once again, David, in addition to his anger because this is just injustice he felt, but in addition to that, he also has to prove that he had nothing to do with it and he's not happy with it. So he's going to make a very public display now, again, to disassociate himself from this action, the assassination of his opponent. David commands the Ne'arim, his attendants, Vayahargum, and they killed them, and they chopped their hands and feet off. And they hung them over the spring in Hebron. And they took the head of Ishbosheth and they buried it in the grave of Abner in Hebron, which is very interesting. So first of all, what did he do? And they chopped off the hands and the feet of the assassins. The hands that committed the act and the feet that rushed to go tell David about it, those were chopped up, right? Measure for measure. There's a halachic issue here, as there was earlier by the Amalekite, and that is we don't convict based on a testimony about yourself. There's no such thing as self-incrimination in Jewish law. If a person says, I committed a sin, I committed a crime, rather, and he goes to a human court and says, I committed a crime, they will not punish him based on his own words, with the exception of monetary things, because a person's in control of his own money and he can always give it away. So with that, we say, pay up. If you say you owe it, pay it. But when it comes to anything else, certainly something that's punishable by death, if he says, I committed murder, we don't punish that in a court of law. So how could David here convict them based on their own admission? They said he didn't see them kill Ishbosheth, and yet he's executing them based on their own testimony, self-incrimination. So the answer here, as it was by the Amaleki, is that it's correct. This was not a legal thing. Here is David exercising his powers as the king to override the law. Sometimes the king is able to make decrees and enactments and issue even a sentence for death if he feels that it will stabilize the country. And here, his kingship had become destabilized. With this assassination, it's completely making him look, it's completely ruining David's reputation. And therefore, in order to stabilize his kingship and the people, he had to issue this decree to kill them based on their own testimony, even though legally they were not liable to death. Yeah, legally they're not liable to death, but he issued this decree based on their own testimony because he felt it was necessary for the time. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Pak.
These two folks that killed violated the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. They weren't in war or battle, so it's a little different. They just committed murder.
Yes.
In this case, if there's no witnesses in court, they would get away with it.
That is correct. That we cannot convict anyone without witnesses.
Right.
The only way you can convict is witnesses, even if it's one of the 10 Commandments. The only way the court will accept that it happened is if you have the two witnesses testifying, two kosher witnesses. It's a good point. Perhaps they would argue that this is not murder because Ishbosheth, you can argue, is committing treason by going against David's authority and pretending that he's the king. That's like treason, and maybe he's liable to death, and therefore they're doing the king a favor. Maybe that's how they viewed it. Although we don't have to credit their intentions or find, we don't have to judge them favorably. But they thought they were doing a good thing, that was for sure. But yeah, even with murder or even severe sins, we won't accept it. That being said, like the leaders of the generation do have the authority to do things that are beyond the letter of the law if they find it's necessary, right? So the head prophet or the king, like in this case, the king, and um, even based in even a regular Sanhedrin, um, they are able to make decrees to maintain stability and proper running of it. Because if you did everything by Torah law, then it would be impossible. People commit murder all the time and theft, etc. You wouldn't be able to convict them or punish them. So they're allowed to set up their own systems of law that will be different than the Torah's. It's a delicate balance between maintaining Torah law and this. But when it comes to capital things like killing people, that usually will go with the Torah's laws and even try to avoid convicting. Okay. Yeah. Before we transition to the reign of David, which is really going to take hold in chapter 5, I came across a fascinating piece from the Sefer HaIkarim. Rabbi Yosef Alba was one of the Rishonim, one of the early scholars. What year did he live? I could tell you that in a moment. About the 1400s. Okay, he lived in around the 1400s. He asks over there, in a different context, he asks, what's the difference between David and Shaul? How come when Saul sins, he loses his kingship? And not only that, Shmuel says to him, because of what you've done, you didn't kill Amalek, you're going to die tomorrow. He has a shortened life. And not only does he die, his children are all killed off, and he has no worthy descendants. Completely taken out of the picture of the kingship. When David sins, as we'll see soon, with Bathsheba, he's punished, but he doesn't lose the kingship. In fact, it's promised that it will continue through him eternally. And the Mashiach, which we await, is going to be a descendant of David. So what's the difference between the sin? Well, maybe we should wait for David's sin to discuss this at length. But I'll put it out here now, because we're already starting to see the great contrast between David and Shaul. One fundamental difference is Shaul's sin had to do with his command as a king. As a king, he was commanded, wait for me in Gilgal for 7 days and then bring the sacrifices. He didn't wait for Shmuel. As a king, he was commanded, wipe out Amalek, and he didn't wipe out Amalek. He failed his duties as a king, which is severe. David's sin was a personal sin. He had done whatever he did with Bathsheba, which we'll discuss the details, what he did yes do, what he did not do, what was right, what was wrong. But that was not violating the rules of a king. It was violating the rules of a private citizen. And therefore, he didn't deserve losing the kingship. That's one fundamental difference, which we'll discuss more when we get there. But in addition to that, I think what we're seeing here is the values system that David holds to himself to versus Shaul. When there was a little bit of pressure from the nation, Shaul preemptively brought the sacrifices. He held off on killing Amalek because he had mercy on the enemy or what have you. David, no misplaced mercy and no fear from humans. What he felt was right and that God wanted, he took care of. He wasn't afraid of Goliath. He wasn't, and here he's not afraid of his supporters. Right? I'm going to lose support. Finally, my opponents have been assassinated. No. I'm not in it for my own gain, for my own honor. And if I held you shouldn't have killed my opponent, you're toast. You're finished. I'm not afraid of the repercussions if I'm doing what's right. The fierceness of David, on the one hand, extremely benevolent, takes care of people, distributes the wealth after the spoils of war. I'm reflecting a little bit of review. It distributes the wealth evenly, makes sure everyone's taken care of. On the other hand, extremely fierce when it comes to right and wrong. No room for error. It's an amazing balance that David's able to hold that Shaul had failed. Shaul had failed. And this is what Rabbi Albo discusses in the Sefer Ikram, contrasting the sins and the life of Saul and David. It's a fascinating exercise, which I'm just introducing you to that thought flow. Like the question to introduce it is, what's the difference between David and Shaul? How come Shaul sins and he loses the kingship? And how come David sins and he doesn't? Maybe I should have made it a discussion rather than a speech, but okay, I just wanted to bring that to the table. Okay, moving, and the reason I pause here to do it is because, first of all, we see David's actions here again, such firmness for the truth. On the one hand, kind, on the other hand, fierce. And number two is now we have finally finished the line of Shaul. At least people who are worthy of reigning or of taking the throne are no longer around. And that is a result of Shaul's failings as a king. Okay, chapter number 5, we'll get started a little bit. Vayvohu kol shiftei Yisrael el David Hebron. All of the tribes of Israel, all of them, as opposed to before he was only over Yehuda. They all came to David, to Hebron, and they said, Hinenu atzmecha uvsarcha anachnu. Here we are, behold, we are your flesh and your bone, right? A complete commitment, an expression of allegiance to David. There's no more confusion who's the leader. They saw that his motives were pure after killing and hanging the assassins. They saw what type of person he was. After the eulogy, after the killing and the hanging, he finally gets the allegiance of everyone. Even yesterday and before yesterday, when Shaul was king over us, you were the one who brought Israel out and brought them in. And Hashem said of you, you shall shepherd my people, and you shall be the ruler over Israel. Yeah, meaning all along we've seen that you're really worthy of leading us because you've been the fierce warrior. You fought the Plishtim. You're doing well. We saw some of this before. Abner, when he wanted to gather support for David, he said, I know you've supported it all along. Even though you picked Shaul or you continued like voting for Ishbosheth, I know really you wanted in your hearts David. He had won the hearts of the people, which is so significant. That's essential for a king. Vayomer, this is something Jewish that's happening here. I just wanted to tell you about it. When we talk about going out to war, the expression is motzi umevi, to take out and to bring back. The Jewish kings and leaders were told and commanded to go out with their people into battle. And not only you should go out, but you should go first. You should be amongst the front. Amongst the front, to inspire passion and allegiance and dedication. As opposed to other nations where the king will stay behind to make sure he's safe. Here, Hashem tells leaders to go out for. And in fact, in last week's Parsha, Rashi says that what was the one battle that Yeshua lost? Do you recall? The one battle that Joshua lost. Number 2, it was the battle against Ai. The first attempt to capture Ai was a failure. They lost 36 men. What was wrong there? So first of all, somebody amongst them had sinned, but Yeshua was not there with them. He sat behind and they went forward, and the people did not win. It's motzi. When the king takes them out, when the leader takes them out, that's when they're victorious. It's a fascinating thing. Okay. So the people come to David, let's hold it here. I want to do this chapter credit. It's David's ascent to power and making the capital of Yerushalayim. So we'll continue here next week, God willing. Next week, because sunset is pulling back earlier, we're going to push the session till after Marv. I'll send out announcements about it. It will be 8:15 or 8:30. Do you have a preference? 8:15 or 8:30?
Oh, they're both good for us.
Both good for you? Okay. And so I'll take a poll and I'll try to do some recruitment as well. As we're starting this new section, really the end of the Shaul and David's conflict is here now. And now we're going to talk about the ascent of David and the stories of his life. So I'll try to recruit some new listeners that won't be intimidated by what they missed. Okay. So we'll decide on a new time, 8:15 or 8:30 next week. I'll send out an announcement.
Right.
Okay. Have a wonderful night. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, you too. Bye.